perspective, if you don't mind, Professor Tottoli. I have just come across to check the ongoing Quran Peace project in the website of the European Desert Council and found at least four of them. So let me mention them very briefly to give the audience some context and to show you the current trend of Quranic studies in Europe. So there is the Global Quran directed by Mas Fadli and Mas Munirul Ikhwan, ex-PhD supervisor, Professor Kalijaga from Freiburg. And there is a project on visuality in the Quran and Al Islam, currently led by Professor Kaloska in Jerusalem. Also a project on creating a historical critical commentary of the Quran, conducted by Professor Nicholas Sinan from Oxford. And probably the biggest of them is the European Quran, founded and directed by Professor Tottoli from University of Naples, together with his colleague from Madrid, Naples. So we are very glad to have you here, Professor Tottoli. Today we have two exciting talks from two distinguished scholars. One is Professor Roberto Tottoli, and the other is our colleague, Dr. Munirul Ikhwan. Professor Roberto Tottoli is a prominent Arabist and scholar of Islamic history, and he is an expert in Arabic Quranic manuscript tradition, as well as in the history of European Latin and vernacular translation of the Quran. Since 2002, he has taught Islamic studies and Islamic Arabic literature in the Africa and Mediterranean Asia Department at the University of Naples, Orientali. His research interests focus on Muslim tradition and literature. His early studies and his PhD deal with the stories of the biblical prophet in the Quran and Islamic literature, especially in the early centuries of Islam. And then he later expanded his interest to Hadith literature, to Quranic exegesis, and Muslim contemporary. So I would like to respectfully invite Professor Roberto Tottoli to deliver your talk in the next 30-45 minutes. And audience, please give a round of applause and a big welcome for Professor.
Thank you very much for this warm welcome. I came here for a short visit with my colleague, Professor Rector, and I spend one talk every day in university. When I was coming here, my guy said I'm rather tired, but they can see that I'm not tired at all. Because for a scholar writing scholarly papers and books, scholarly papers are not read by me. When you come across some scholars, renowned scholars, students in Islamic studies, where know some of your work in another part of the world, and coming from a Muslim country, it's very exciting. So every tiredness went away, and I'm very happy to hear something like the best comment we had. The last lecture was a great experience also in the university, and I must say that after this, and be able to enter much more inside what I want to say. Before coming to the specific of the project, also you mentioned it's quite interesting phenomenon that we have European Commission putting tens of millions for projects around the Quran, which is a rather political and cultural thing that must be underlined. And we see what distinguishes big synergy project synergy because it connects many places, much more financed than the other ones. I would like to mention something like to enter through the door of the recent history of Quranic studies in West. Also, which are the dynamics now touching our field of research, which is something related to a book mine which just appeared in Italian, but was translation will be out in January in our series of this project. And as all European projects, books and papers are open access, so very easily downloaded. But I would like also to go back to something related to my approach to studies. In the beginning of September this year in Palermo, Italy, was the annual conference of the International Quranic Studies Association, which was American founded but worldwide. And I think they came just one annual conference. I was invited to debate talks. I started saying that I never thought when I started working myself as a scholar in Quran stuff. But I had to recognize somehow that something like a pretending something. Because my first book was about the prophets in the Quran. And more or less, even if I always thought about myself as more a hadith scholar, I remember our common friend in a Berlin conference saying, hadith scholar. I was very proud of it. But now that I am also involved with the Quran project, I came to understand that for everybody dealing with the early Islam, every scholar in Islamic studies actually a scholar in Quran. For more or less, always you do expect parts of the Quran, influence of the tradition, the relation with Hadith and the Sira literatures. What I said in this keynote talk in Congress in Palermo was much related to this book of introduction to Islamic studies. And it was a way to also give a substance to this project, stating that somehow Quranic studies are in a freezing moment. There is a great explosion. Though some of these numerous handbooks are coming one after the other, but when Studio per l'Oriente, Oriente Moderno, asked me to produce a small introduction to Quran, finally I had to say it was not possible because it was not possible to manage the Western literature of the Quran appeared in the last. So I realized this monograph somehow delineating the main lines of research and so on. And this Palermo conference and also underlining how now Quranic studies are not only a very of research, but it's also a place of confrontation of many different lines. Focusing on the main topics, dealing first of all with the contents of the Quran, which are the subjects inside the Quran, prophets, theology, parts of man, God, and so on, and how somehow scholarly research, for example, has different of means inside the picture of the later environment. Quite interesting that the focus now on the environment Quran, which is not more as in the past connected all sorts of Quran, but to the environmental place where Muhammad and the knowledge of here really was specific, which is quite interesting, maybe in the last years, even if somehow taking away strength with Oriental, in fact, that many major centers and studies across the world, North America, there are many graduated, were formed in Europe, and now join the major Western studies, bringing their very comprehensive studies, having a different approach to Quran, and try to find different ways to analyze the Quran, the environment, form and but in this realm, also in connection with current research, surely from the point of view of myself, hypothetically outside. It is actually the line of research concerning the form of the Arabic Quran, the inner logics in the sutras, in the verses, discussion about metaphoric style, inner coherence of the four chapters, and so on. it's amazing how we don't have one week passing, one article or one book on this topic are published. So this is something which proper realm of research has in itself some seeds of popularization with all the attitude to consider the Quran, by the way, a very difficult test, with a difficult logic to understand, and on the other side, you have Muslim scholars, but also non-Muslim scholars underlying the inner coherence of a single chapter of the Quran, the perfection of the language, and so on, and debating side this line of studies very harshly about the existence of not of the coherence. This is something completely different by the old school of Oriental studies, where a general approach of text and and now this reflects a very different attitude. Where Muslim, where non-Muslim trying somehow to regulate another approach to the Quran, which wants to be different from the past. But you have also neutral scholars underlining that somehow the distance between speaking Arabic, the setting of an old text, somehow the problem, and have go over that over to analyze the past. As I said, there is a number of I guess that now we have three major series of it. One by Daily Studies London, the one by Utrecht. I guess a half of these books are question connected to the formal part of the Quran, the discussion of the formal aspects of the Quran, language, rhetorical devices, logic, the formulas. If we still consider the question of the origin of the Quran, somehow quite interesting how it is also a very set of the research of the Quran, and it is related to finally the comprehensive discussion of the pure now, but not so pure, early manuscript of the Quran from the 7th century, and the cross-referencing of these with the amazing exegetical literature on art, small variation, text, recipe, and transmitted. We have an amazing literature on this, attesting how the Quran was somehow fixed by Uthman, and then also later on until Abdul Malik and Judge changing a little bit, but then you have also the large and somehow also exploding Islamic literature about the 7th, the 10th, the Qur'an, the Shawab, Al-Quran. So an incredible exegetical discussion about the concept. What is new and interesting in Western studies that finally we have some very important textual proof. As you know, the Sana manuscript of the Quran, manuscript Sana 1, is a final proof that the text of the Quran, as we know it today, it goes back to exactly as the Muslim, probably during the year of the reign of Uthman, and also the work made by major scholars in between, like François de Roche, scholar main authority about studies of Quranic manuscripts, demonstrating how these manuscripts include some variants, but there are small details, nothing substantial, well reflecting the same dynamics attested in the exegetical literature. Maybe not attesting the same small variant, but the picture of the nature of the variance quite. It is, as I mentioned also, talking Palermo, it's quite interesting to underline that this manuscript evidence somehow denies completely which was the once vision of a Quran later accidents. It's no more tenable. even if Wansbrook books, they are very important, let's say, because they fuel the new studies of the Quran. They were also rather complicated, but very learned books. But now the main, theory of Quranic studies by Wansbrook are completely bypassed by we really hope that many more materials come out. Textual proof of the existence of the Quran as it now exactly the same period that Islamic, not only Islamic literature, but the reception of the Quran in many areas. For instance, how the Quran permeated the philosophical, literary works of Islam, how the Quranic world became also fundamental in some specific sciences. I think about Tajweed, meditation, the huge literature, as I mentioned, about the Quranic things, and above all, topics, the last second one, and question. The first one is the proper history of the Egyptian. It's quite interesting that now, also in Western scholarship, we have a number of growing programs in major papers, the history of Quranic history. And if you consider, the first book in this field was actually the one that Claude Gillot, French, dedicated to Tottoli. It was 91. Yes, 30 years ago. After that, we have now something like a shelf of a library with studies dedicated to about one work on Arabic, and the last one, Kalijaga on Farsi. It is quite interesting that now scholars are starting to read study. I remember when I was in my tutor at the time, and when you read the Musnad of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, right? And then one month you read it, and it is very important. Let me also think about this now. When you have a lot of database searchable works that are fundamental now for research, but you read a complete book, gives you the taste of a building novel. And it's quite interesting now. Works on exegetical literature, now reconstructing the history of the genre. You know very well Johanna, who is now the major scholar of contemporary, who has the great merit to cover as far as possible with her great knowledge all the Islamic countries. Because in Islamic studies, the approach to Islamic studies was much more connected to Arabic studies. Also, because not only the Quran is written in Arabic, but also because the Arab world is in front of people. By far easier to go to our country. And Johanna Ping and also many other scholars now are really focusing on how dynamic that when you go until Indonesia, India, Pakistan, and so on. The second, actually, all the themes I mentioned have a much larger treatment. The last of the three lines of research inside Quranic studies, and one recalling our project that devoted to the study of the translations. No, also in Islamic studies was somehow the handbook on which I studied a few, not so many years ago. Don't go back all the times, but the 80s at least was a common statement that Muslim tradition is against translation, so there is a lot of that when you come to study that this phenomenon, even for the first time, you find a rather more common. That means that as you go for Celtic practices and so on, you put Arabic. It does not mean that from at least the 10th century, but also translation of the meanings of the Quran, help comprehension, starting from Persia and to this you have to add some of the more recent developments. You have an incredible spread of translations. Or that you have translation in so many languages prompted by Saudi Arabia and the institution, which is also another interesting phenomenon. Also, the printing of the various lines of translation, going by with publication of so many. And you have a lot of translating activity all over Europe and the West. Another major scholar in Islam studies based in the West, Prof. Lawrence, has written a monograph dedicated to the translations of Quran in English. Arriving at the last pictorial translation of the Quran, the American Quran by European, which is an interesting operation, try to present the Quran unknown shape for Western religion. This activity of translation and knowledge of the Quran is actually a long preview. And I come to the idea of this project, the European Quran, started actually by the connection inspired by the repetition of conferences around translations, works on the Quran, approaches to the Quran by scholars of Arab, which is also a very interesting line of researches of the last 50 years. Alistair Hamilton, or 8-year-old scholar in the history of scholars of Arabic, was somebody like the inventor of the study, and 30 years ago was the only one working on the study of Arabic and Islam in Nepal and Modernization, with some other Norman Daniel scholars. But in the last 50 years, we have seen a lot of work on this study. Connected to this, so starting from Mercedes Garcia, the next slide. Meeting her and also the name that you see here, the idea to try to connect and collect all the expertises about this topic, that is how the Quran sees every form in the history of Europe for the contemporary. Broadly, the middle of the 19th century, which is the day when it's true, the so-called scientific orientalism started. I do not mean that perfect scholarship, but when we become the middle of the 19th century, we are in a different world. There was the colonial period, Western power, countries were possibly to acquire more and more material, knowing better language and so on. If you go back to previous times, we have a different situation, and we wanted somehow to focus on it. Actually, the title and the desire to inquire in this direction was rather challenging, since the title, which was very discussed between us and also among the reviewers sent the project to before submitting. But there was a large discussion about if to title the project the Quran in Europe or the European Quran, which is a rather tricky question because, as you can imagine, some of the reviewers said, come on, there is one Quran. And it's not an Asian, an African, and European. But finally, we decided to use the European Quran for a specific cultural and political commitment because the project was born with the idea to demonstrate that the Quran, the circulation of manuscripts, the translations, they use even in polemical literature, had a role since the Middle Ages until the 19th century in the shaping of the European religious identity. When we went in front of the final committee, it was made by 16 people, and you have to interact for 1 hour trying to complete the project. And a committee which is not made by scholars in Islamic studies. There are only people. Only one, William Graham from Harvard, yes, and two religious studies, other were from social science and so on. And the discussion was really very harsh because an hour they want to felicitate the weak point. They said, oh, you want to say that the Quran was so fundamental in the identity? Well, in Christianity, what are they? Altogether, no, absolutely. We are not doing this project for you. But we think that the last 50 years of scholarship on Quran, discussing approaches from the Middle Age and Modern Age, are demonstrating that the Quran serves as an actor in many things. This quoted translations. It appears in 6th century all the time, evocating the polemic in Protestants and Catholics. And then you have many testimonies collected by different scholars, sometimes not talking each other, that permit us, we hope, at the end of this year project, to demonstrate that the Quran was a supporting them. And the situation prompted by immigration is not something completely new, as some politicians want to say, but is a new chapter in a centuries-long long. To do such a challenging project and trying to demonstrate in front of a judging committee that work to run the list, as in every project, to come to nothing, come to an end, not find evidence about it. We put together these 4 scholars who has different expertise. Because the year 6 project, which are very well financed, have the spirit to put together different places that need each other, no? To collaborate, because one only center has not all the expertise carry out. So you need to connect it over. The central PI is Garcia Renal, who is in Madrid. She is an expert of Muslim minorities and converts in Spain. No Spain, new nation, presence of Muslims and Arabs for almost 1,000 years. And it was the first place where the Quran was translated, right? And many experts about Arabic and Quran going around Europe as teachers and so on used to come from Spain. A lot of the first Arabic manuscripts present in Europe used as sources on works of Islam of the Quran in Europe came from the Iberian Peninsula, from Spain and Gaul. So it was very important to have one expert. John Tolan is a medievalist that is covering the period from the 12th to the 15th century in Europe, before the discovery of America, before the invention of the printing of the type. So a period of the first steps in the knowledge of the Quran and Islam in Europe, very difficult for many people, because access to Arabic manuscripts, because knowledge of Arabic was present in Spain and not so many places all over Europe. But it was also a period from the 14th century that, for instance, missionaries from Italy used to go to Americans, Islamic world, coming back, bringing news, describing the Quran. Actually, this time we were polemical, not because Muslims were the enemy on the other shore of the Mediterranean, but displaying also a great interest to understand why so many people were believers in such book, and this was a very important contribution. And John Tolan and his group in that was for name, but every unit has one principal investigator like myself, but we have 6 or 10 PhD students or postdocs. So now the project, in the middle of the project, we have almost 40 people researching on specific topics, which is quite a lot. Actually, these are very rich projects that permit connect people, having 40 people working on specific lines of research on the presence of running growth. It's a unique Ian Lope is a historian of modern age, 16th and 17th century. He has written a very nice, great book on Joseph Ottinger, who was a Swiss expert in Arabic and Islam, who has written a lot about topics, and the focus is Hagen about the 6th and 7th. I am the investigator of the unit Naples. I'm an Arabist, and we work mainly on the manuscripts preserved in Europe in Middle Ages and Modern Age. That is, we and also the postdocs go to libraries looking for materials present from the 14th century on, working on annotation, which people used to work on these plans. And I myself am working for a phonograph when I would finish it, but starting to collect material about the first printings of the Quran in Europe. The printing with prototype was invented in Europe. Wooden block print actually were known in Paris 16th century before, but the prototypes were invented in Germany and then spread all over Europe, and Italy became the 16th century. And actually, in Venice, you have the first by Faber and son, Paganino and Alessandro Paganini, who probably tried to print a book to trade it to the Ottoman. So it is quite interesting that this is the first printing of the Quran in the type almost 300 years before the print, Russia and Kazan and in the Islamic country. You know, for many reasons, print type not entered a massive form also in relation with politics. Arabic script has a problem in itself because when you have a joint letters, non-movable types were not of good quality, I guess, and that was the great. You have many attestations also of 16th, 17th century, and we are collecting them in Naples, but quite a number of scholars in Arabic and Semitic language prepared personal copies of the Quran in Arabic. But they could not find the time or money. So there was a great interest. I mean, I'm talking about a few scholars, maybe 10, 20, but to demonstrate their proficiency in Arabic and Semitic languages, they stated in letters and left in manuscripts attestations that they wanted to print the Quran in Arabic. And we are talking about Europe, the situation. We have also a number of scholars about their articles in Amsterdam, Berenstock in Budapest, Kalijaga in Barcelona, and over connected to culture all around Europe. I mean, those scholars somehow dealing with topics connected to major topics. You can ask yourself, and we are still asking ourselves, why the European Commission answered the topic such as I think that was the challenging given by the title and the idea to somehow complete the general outlook of studies of the Quran that you mentioned. Because if you put together the different ESC projects being carried out of the Quran, you have origin of the Quran, no? Early or the origin of the Quran, one that's element. You have an exegetical tradition with Quran. You have then the type of the Quran in Europe until contemporary times, and then you have Yohanna being other contemporary. So it's quite interesting that the European Commission is trying to reconcile somehow a history of the Quran. And this somehow the project that brings from the early Quran, original Quran, until contemporary time with something which is close to European. That is the presence of the Quran in Europe. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. There will be there can be a lot of examples to demonstrate, not much time, the relevance and how deep is historical question surrounding scene or episodes connecting the history of the Quran to Europe and the West. You have here an example, just trying to tell you how complex can be facts and how stratification of previous stories is fundamental also. And with this project, we want to go deep inside this historical stratification of the presence of the Quran. You have here a photo of the first Muslim elected to the United States Congress. Ellison was a convert to Islam, and since congressmen in the US are asked to swear on the Bible or the interpret, he asked to use the Quran instead of the Bible, and he was permitted to swear in office on the Quran that once belonged to President Thomas Jefferson, one of the founders. And so this procedure arose some polemics by conservatives, the same kind of conservatives that somehow part of the about Barack Obama. But what is relevant to the story is that the Quran of Thomas Jefferson not a neutral version. Actually, it was a 1764 printing of an English translation by George Sale, which was for a long time the most translation of the Quran, which was originally realized in 1734, the beginning of it. And the introduction is quite interesting. Mention of some works coming from Spanish peninsula about Islam and the Quran as sources for this work. So this translation calls back to the story of the 16th century. And it is also quite interesting the introduction, the general introduction to the nature of the Quran given by Sale, because Sale prefaced in his translation, in his introductory discourse, presenting Islam as a reformed, pure monotheism, free of the doctrinal accretions and semi-pagan practices which he affirmed tainted Christianity. But when he mentioned Christianity, he actually thinks about Catholicism, because he was a Protestant, and somehow was stating the Quran is a text pure monotheism, not like the Catholics, one full of paganism. Quite interesting. This will be a common use of the Quran in politics, where they use the Quran to attack Catholics or Protestants or sects, but also to defend their position, say an Old Testament or like the Quran is closer. Many things can be taken from this text, which attest somehow the complex history of a single book of the Quran and how such a single book, a translation of the Quran, entered the Quranic history of the United States with something like a polemical problem. Let's go to the next slide. You can see here the description of the project I mentioned so far. This slide is simply the meaning here to explain to you the two dates. I already explained why I mentioned the middle of the mid-19th century, when scientific Orientalism was born. The date of beginning of a project, 1142, actually refers to the dating of the first Latin translation of by Roberto Rector in Toledo, Spain, who was commissioned by the abbot of Munirul, the Catholic, translate some books from Arabic related to Islamic religion, and one of the books, absolutely, the Quran, translated into English. What we hope to produce at the end of this project. First of all, I must add, before coming to our product, at the end, that if in front of the judging commission, when we went there years ago, we had some doubts between ourselves. Presenting the project, describing all the lines of research. Are we sure we can find all this material? Now I can say that in the middle of it, we would be able to have 100. This is not uncommon. You in your research or studies, when you start focusing on a topic, looks now at the beginning, but most of the time it opens to many different stuff. And you always discover a very fascinating way that you have much more than you can start yet. First of all, we already started to produce, and we are producing, next slide, mapped database of, the next one. We are producing a database including for every items produced, literary items produced in Europe about the Quran. That is not only all the translations, editions, works of the Quran, but every work, European literatures, simply mentioning the Quran or touching on. This is built, it started 1 year and a half after the beginning of the project, because to have a simple database is very easy, but to have a good one, defining from the beginning all the things, and above all, to realize a database searchable from different engines and be useful to everybody is not so easy. But now we have collected more than 1,000 entries, and we hope to cover what thing would be no less than 5,000 entries of works in European history dealing or simply mentioning the Quran. Well, here, for instance, a slide of one of the copies of Quran produced by European hand. This is a Quran written by Johann Seckendorf, a German from Sunan, Saxony, who produced in 1632 this Quran written in Arabic by his hand and translating word per word in Latin. Quite interesting, because this manuscript was discovered 5 years ago in the National Library in Cairo by chance. It was catalogued under the Masahif collection, and for some reasons from Germany it reached Egypt and was there unsearched, because many things you can find for our better catalog, or sometimes people don't know what they are. So this is actually a Quran, but a very simple Quran written by a European who was poorly working the first half of the 17th century. He produced 2 small booklets of the Quran with wooden engravings in a terrible Arabic during the 30 years old, and writing an introduction that he had a whole Quran ready, but no money and no time to publish it. And all the scholars until 5 years ago, they know what he's pretending. Of course, we usually say that they have more than they actually have. But it was true. He had already ready all the Quran. Next slide. Here you have a printed book. Here it is quite interesting line with what I said before. You have one book with the name of Luther, Martin Luther, the founder of Reformation, who you find many times in connection to works of the Quran in early 16th. Quite interesting. He was very much interested in translating German European works of the Quran because he used very often reference to Islam as a way to polemize with Catholicism. So you find many mention of the Quran, even polemical with Quran and Islam, but the war's object is not actually Islam and Muslim, but Catholic. Quite interesting. Yeah. They say, no, the Quran is like what the Catholics might say. The Quran says other things like a Protestant. It is, the first is polemical. But behind you have the idea that the Quran is a protagonist. Different churches and sects use the Quran to substantiate their credentials. Quite amazing and interesting. Next slide. The second, since we are humanists, our product par excellence is writing articles and articles. This never-ending story of production and stuff. And we started now this series of publications that you can find on the site of the Rector. The first two monographs are collected studies dedicated to the Latin Quran, the work on Latin of the Quran, and the one which just appeared, the Iberian Quran, that is dynamics of collection of the Quran translation and edition in mostly Spain and Spain after the Catholic Reconquista. The next books will be my introduction to Quranic studies and the volume coming from a conference in Rome last March dedicated to the Quran in Rome. Rome as the place of the Pope and the central place of Catholic Christian, and has a huge collection, Vatican Library of Quran manuscripts, materials, and religious orders have an incredible archive of many things connected to missions to our country. Most of these materials are still there to be studied, and many things are coming. The third major product will be the last year of the project, a major exhibition. We had contacts with many museums all over Europe. We are finalizing the Naples. It is also quite interesting. Because in the beginning, we were supposed to have an exhibition in London, Madrid, Vienna, and Budapest. But now Budapest went out of many progress. And London British Museum declined the offer because the question is quite interesting. They said that the display all the polemical works of Quran can somehow badly received by the president. So, we are in a world of political correctness, which is better than fight each other bad words, but sometimes the risk to somehow censor yourself and in this story it's quite interesting that Northern Europe went out of reach, but now we have probably organized one Vatican library, and we are taking a course with Morocco and Tunisia. So you have the funny story that some places in Europe not perceiving the challenging effort of this exhibition. Yes, to show that there were polemics, but there were much more of the presence of the Quran. That they are afraid the attention by the authorities, while this problem apparently is not in countries like Morocco and Tunisia. To show something, maybe how bad were the Europeans in the past. So, this is quite next slide. I'm coming to the end of my presentation. You have here a list of many things that we are discovering in the project. This group of almost 40 young scholars is really amazing because even if COVID stopped a little bit our activity, now the last year we started again with periodical meetings in one place where they can share their knowledge. And this is very important because sometimes the historian of ideas coming from Copenhagen knows very well culture, but doesn't know Arabic, doesn't know which sources actually they use and how they use. So he needs to come to Naples with the Arabs just to know the way they use them. You have here a list of anything, translation studies, a lot of it coming out from. We are discovering, I think, from all our people working in the main language, probably part of the Arabic translation of the Quran by Quran, various translations by guys, about which we knew from their letters but were never found. We found them searching in libraries. So, let me finish my presentation with another small sample to show how the Quran solicited many things in the history of Europe. If the example with which I started was connected to contemporary time, Congressman Ellison in 2007, now we go back to the middle of the 16th century. You have here Michael Servetus, who was burned at the stake as a heretic. Was burned in the city of Geneva, ruled by Jean Calvin, the originator of Calvinism, Protestant church. And he was burned with accusation of denying the Holy Trinity, a major dogma in Christianity, a fundamental Christian dogma. Actually, Servetus, earlier the same year, 1553, had published his book titled The Restitution of Christianity, attacking the doctrine of the Trinity. And he took some of his Trinitarian arguments from his reading the Quran. He mentioned, I discovered in many sources that Holy Trinity is a Catholic invention, not true, and one of my sources is the Quran. But what is interesting here that even if he was of Spanish origin, he did not use the Latin translation. He did not use some of the later Spanish translation which he said that is also decided very effective. But actually he used the translation into Latin produced in 1142 by Roberto, the first Latin translation. Why did he use translation? Because just a few years before, in 1543, this translation was published in Switzerland, Basel, with an introduction of Martin Luther. And this was another interesting, complicated story because the publisher, Theodor Bibliander, started to print, then was stopped and imprisoned. The Council of Fathers said, no, you cannot print. It's dangerous. We don't want to have copies of it printed in 1,000 copies. To have one manuscript in a library for two scholars is enough. After 1 year, there was the intervention by Martin Luther. They said, no, it's very important to publish the Quran because people can read it and can see similarity with Catholic Christianity. And so, and it's also good to have a copy of the Quran. So we know better the holy books of a Muslim, yes, polemicize with it, but also to use the polemics with Catholic. It is somehow peculiar or strange, paradoxical that at the end the fairs published the Quran, actually they are well granted because it took only 10 years to Michael Servetus actually to use the Quran to attack Protestant churches and so on. So you have here a circle of pairs defending the publishing of the Quran, the use of the Quran, the relevance of printing, because when you have a copy of 1,000 copies rather than one or two, that is. This is only one after first example of editor. There could be tens, hundreds, and this project started from the idea to highlight different moments and to connect all of them in a long line of the history of the presence of Quran. Cherry was not absolutely the major actor in the formation of the but was a supporting actor, and this supporting function was not always a question of politics. We are reconstructing incredible biography scholars around the Quran who actually wrote very political books, but dedicated 40 years of their life to translate, edit the Quran, working hard, produce thousands of pages, where you have the perceptions that the religious climate of the time, you had to write very political, because otherwise churches would not permit to be a piece of reality. But behind, see a very passion to know better what the Quran and the Islam contain. This was made in 2 times also, and there were mistakes, absolutely, comprehension, and so on. But if you think that until the middle, the end of the century, most of the scholars had maybe one manuscript of the Quran, with all the difficulties only one Quran can contain. Script or can be put effective. There are the signs for recitation, localization. Someone not knowing anything about having only one manuscript can find a lot of problems. One manuscript, sometimes a part or one Quranic study, not even a good dictionary in Arabic, and isolated in Europe, somehow crossed by plagues, wars, maybe competition. I guess that beyond the political, this was also a great Ikhwan form, try to understand the other, to connect this to the interest of the time, of the political competition, the offshore Mediterranean, but also a strong and great intellectual form which attests how the Quran actually was always present inside it. And in a time when immigration and displacement, the last 50 years ago, it's also a way to counteract again, present saying that there's no connection and there's no root but we think that we able to demonstrate what we want to be. Say that there's a very close and important chapter in
Well, many thanks for Professor Tottoli for your insightful presentation on your thought and also on your current project that is wowing. Wowing is not in English term. It is something that makes us saying wow. And the confident asked me to wrap up your talk into a brief bahasa Indonesia. Jadi ada penjelasan tadi mengenai konteks bagaimana studi Quran sudah ke arah yang dekat dengan pemahaman orang Muslim. Ada penjelasan beberapa mengenai perkembangan Iksa dan dari segi konten tadi dipaparkan dengan sangat jelas ya tentang proyeknya, sejarahnya, orang-orangnya, kapabilitasnya, skopnya, terus expected produknya yang ternyata jauh melampaui dari yang saya pertama kali. Jadi dan ada tadi beberapa detail-detail yang menarik, saya kira teman-teman bisa persiapkan diri untuk bertanya. Termasuk tadi ada clue tentang mengapa dinamakan European Quran yang kita tahu pasti berbeda dengan let's say tafsir Nusantara atau Indonesian Quran. Nanti silakan ditanyakan dengan detail. So now we'll listen to the presentation of Dr. Munirul Ikhwan, the Secretary of Postgraduate Program of University. Mas Munir, that's how we usually call him. has obtained his BA from Azhar and MA from Leiden and PhD from Berlin. He has been teaching course on hermeneutics, Quranic studies in Indonesia, and on contemporary Islam and globalization. His PhD thesis, published in 2015, was on Muhammad Quraysh Quranic commentary, and his initiative with the Quran down to earth, Membumi, a project that leads him to be now the general editor of English translation of Shihab's Tafsir al-Misbah, in which Mas Fadli and I are also currently involved. So this evening, Mas Munir will talk about how European studies of Islam shape Quranic studies in modernized Islamic civilization. So thanks, yours. Thank you very much for your introduction. Assalamualaikum students. I was just contacted by organizer, my colleague 2 days ago. Give talk beside Tottoli. I was thinking, what should I give talk? So I started thinking about, partly about what I'm doing now, about how European studies of Islam shape studies, modern Islamic institution. And when I first attended class in Leiden, I came across the book of biblical prophets in the Quran and Islamic literature, and was kind of it helped me to culture reading from Azhar literature, and that's how a European scholar do analysis on some sources. That's very much. And when I first attended class in method and theories in Islamic studies, my professor asked us about the beginning of modernity, which critical cultural connection between modern Europe and the Muslim world. And my professor said it was the French thing, starting from 1801, which has been seen as an important moment in the story of Egypt at the time, because this campaign marked modernization process. But some transformation did take place, but the transformation was from top down. So the transformation was not really indigenous, because it was initiated by the French government and then adopted by some Egyptian elites and rulers. And then this modernization is actually postponed of that. But even worse, modern facilities brought by the French came specifically to serve the French interest at the time. But seeing how Egyptians saw Europe at the time, it was kind of people with more developed technology and more advanced knowledge. And then when Muhammad Ali of Egypt came to power, he adopted some modern European system of education, and then also skills, sending Egyptian students and Egyptian staff to Europe to learn some techniques and skills of modern civilization, to bring them back as modern bureaucrats. And part of this development is the introduction of secular system in it at the time. and which is significantly different from the already existing legislation, mainly maintained by Al-Azhar or religious scholars of Al-Azhar. And this innovation seems inevitable in order to find a number of educated persons to take some position in government and also to give some response to the new life which was created at the time. And modernization in Egypt at the time divided people between modern elite and then less or traditional people who are mainly affiliated with the guidance of the ulama or religious scholars of Al-Azhar. And then Khalid Ismail came to power and tried to implement reforms at Al-Azhar at the time. But the attempt seems to be unsuccessful because of the resistance from the side of the Azhari ulama. And because of that, he opened in 1970 Darul Ulum, now becomes part of the Cairo University, with the aim of training teachers in modern subjects as well as religious ones, as taught in Al-Azhar, but with the hope that this newly founded college would be eventually become an alternative center of Islamic influence in Egypt. So in this way, the Egyptian government attempted to avoid any direct confrontation with religious leaders, offer reforms within the religious system of education. So by building new directive from the already existing religious education, the government tried to implement sort of reform, but because at the time the Egyptian government saw that there must be reform with regard to religious institutions, how Islam should be approached with new way of life milieu. And then what is important is the establishment of the Egyptian University in 1908, which was later named as Ikhwan University, and now it becomes Cairo University. This university serves as an institutional vital in turning Egypt into a modern country, because Prince Fuad, who was at the time the university president, was the main patron of Orientalists who supported their activities at the university. There are some Orientalists who were invited to this university, like Carlo Nari from Italy, Louis Massignon from France, and also some German Orientalists like Others, and others, and many others. So this creates some of these Orientalists introduce new approaches to study Islam, and besides, some ulama also introduce reformism, how to approach or read Quran within different new contexts. Like Muhammad Abdul, very popular, he proposed to the opening of the Sunni close gates of Ijtihad, and also using the Quran as his main project to bring Muslim society new context, bring their voice to new context. But because
Abdul's project of Quran was paradigmatic at the time. It influenced many new scholars, including Amin al-Khuli from the faculty of letters at Kalijaga University. But al-Khuli maybe shared some ideas of Abdul, but he differed from Abdul in terms of he participated with Abdul's idea that the most important goal of the Quran was to give religious guidance. Instead, Amin al-Khuli recognized that giving guidance is one of the goals, but not the main goals, because the first goal of cleaning of teaching the Quran for him, from his standpoint, is that because the Quran is seen by Amin al-Khuli as the greatest book of Arabic and its most important literary work. So, according to him, approaching the Quran from a literary perspective is the most important one. Which means at the time, because al-Khuli traveled to Europe and came to know some works by European scholars, and this is a shift from theological approaches to the Quran to non-theological approach to the Quran. So, and it happened only within the new modern institution. I mean, in this regard, Cairo University. And al-Khuli also had many students, among others, Muhammad Ahmad Falahullah, literary approach to Quranic narratives, which brought about controversies in Egypt at the time, especially he got a harsh resistance from ulama, theologians, and I see that this also happened in Indonesia. Like our university, Sunan Kalijaga, Islamic higher education in Indonesia was initially established based on the more Azhar model. But then, beginning from the 70s, the government tried to modernize the university, and by sending students, lecturers to Europe, to North America, and to study Islam with different approaches, giving not merely approaching Islam from theological perspective, but also from interdisciplinary, from social, anthropological, and perspectives. So, the modernization of Islamic higher education introduced critical reading of Islam and including critical reading of the Quran. And in the late 90s, hermeneutics of the Quran was included to the curriculum of this university. By hermeneutics, I mean Western modern theories of interpretation. So, scholars like Friedrich Schleiermacher, Emilio Betti, Martin Heidegger, Hans Georg Gadamer, and others, Gracia, were introduced to students here. And I would like to introduce you to Professor Sahiran, who is the strong proponent of hermeneutics, adopting Western, modern Western theories of interpretation. He says to enrich the science of the Quran. So,
thank you very much.
But are there some kinds of resistance? Yes. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Controversies exist by associating hermeneutica with liberal Islam or interpreting the Quran with the biblical method of interpretation, which are seen by them as incompatible. And reading the Quran by adopting Western theories of interpretation means that we consider that the Quran not the word of God, but just what speech created by human. So even polemics like Hakon Ahmad Jais, he said that the inclusion of hermeneutica to this university's curriculum indicate the ongoing process of heresy. So a very serious attack. Yeah? So if you already mentioned that in Europe there are many projects of the Quran, and in Indonesia the concern about the Quran mainly about its interpretation. So we still lack scholars who really dedicate themselves to do research on like Quranic manuscripts or the history of the Quran. Many research are dedicated. Research projects are dedicated to interpretation. Yeah, that's why probably because the concern was is on the so when Prof. Sahira introduced a new new approaches which result in new different interpretation from the, let's say, orthodox interpretation. So it will attract resistance from the ulama, some conservative ulama. I think I will not talk longer than because the superstar is Tottoli. So I think I will stop at this point and
That's very insightful and provoking. And now I will give the time for you to write some question. In English is better, but you can also write some question in Bahasa Indonesia, and I'll try to translate it for you. So we have Pak Fatih here, Mas Luha, and from the girls, please. Okay, Pak Fatih, you can begin your page.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Very much. I have a question. Firstly, I was interested in asking a question. Professor, sorry, but I'm hearing the session from you. Apparently, my question is also so it's quite hard. The objective of your project is that to understand how Quran have culture of Europe. Yeah. Yeah, the Marsapi, I remember like but then I didn't get much of the book because for me it is very have to read, and I didn't get any details there. But the general idea is that some of founding fathers of got the idea from. They say that maybe some of cultural element of Europe is taking benefit also from that. My question is, what do you think about? You already have you already have what we can already have a good idea from that philosophy. And if this is the case, I would think that this argument would push us to consider the idea of the beginning of modernity first. As you say, modernity in Europe have some benefit from Islam, but then the beginning of modernity in the world taken from France, from Netherlands, from Germany. So I think the idea of the popular narrative about the beginning of the modernity in the world coming from Europe should find more nuanced explanation about this, or even more, we should reconsider. I mean, can we say about inner modernity from which the Islamic world that was taken by Prof or by Roberto, and then transmitted in Islamic world, and the inner modernity from Islamic world? Yeah, it's just my wild imagination about Jen Markov and your position and what. That's the first. The second is it's not a question really, but George Sell translation of what's that. But my dissertation is about the Quran translation. The Republic of Indonesia, so it's not just Quran translation, but the Quran translation. And the head of the project in his introduction mentioned Sell's name as one of the references. But I actually do not find the actual influence, but the name is written there. It must say something, but unfortunately I didn't know. But I did. Thank you, this is my question.
Thank you. Would like to direct answer? Yeah. I think you can answer it.
No, they are very easy for scholars of Afghanistan, but not scholars of Afghanistan.
So please, Professor Tottoli.
No, thank you very much. I start from the second one. By far much easier. I know some other cases because the influence of the name of George C. as such that until the middle of the 20th century, you always find that many scholars, also strong scholars, mention as a main reference George C. Which, by the way, by an English scholar, Danielson Ross of SOAS, then he made a very short article actually mentioning that he took most of his translation from Malachi's language. The source in Arabic, same words actually are all the ones mentioned by Malachi. But I think it's a very translation. It was printed several times. And even if in the 19th century, over maturing translations made also the end of the 19th century by mostly English speakers, it was something like a rhetoric element. But I see also mentioning all the studies on but I never checked actually the work of they somehow very influential. Something similar happened after when we realized with the translation by Albert. But you can also remember some other literature mention the either references the profession of George Said and then the study. but I have no notion about the real effective influence, or if it is in any case, as you mentioned, it is something like a rhetorical. Okay, if you are working on the Quran, and now you have to mention on the scripture, you can use whatever you want, but mentions are very, at least I choose the third one, but I read also quite common. As regards the first question, this is a very specific topic, but I want to answer very briefly, stating that yes, you have a tiny but constant line of approach to the Quran by European scholars, translators, polemicists, beside the usual trend of inner Christian polemic, stating that the Quran was irrational, mainly from Protestant Northern Europe when they want to attack it, and when, for instance, Rayland Roberto said that some rare works stating that actually they read the Quran and they appreciate. They usually say that they appreciate was more rational. So you have, and a couple of our PhD scholars are working, but this is a line between many others. We have also a line starting with some authors in the 70s, praising the literary quality. It's not clear how much are they. But for inner Christian polemics, you have sometimes for writing that they want to write something like a translation of the Bible from to Aramaic or Gospel, imitating style of the poetic style of the Quran and the Prophet style, way to this person. You have, but it's still as more. I guess that the line of the rationality of the Quran goes by the other line is Quran with something not logical at all, but we have also a strong line about the rationality, mainly coming from Germany, and a scholar, Northern Europe scholar from the 70s, strictly connected to the perception of the Protestant scholars of their faith as more rational than, and sometimes the reference. Then this is somehow an inner seed of modernity for the Western modern and the world or the world. Yes, this is a very topic. Something that Muhammad Abdul was a very topic. So Prof was so strong politically, economically, they went away. And Muslims were they had gone away from the rational principle of Islam. So we used to say that somehow the rationality of the European modernity was more Islamic and not so easy to connect it, but I guess there can timeline something that would have very also in connection how connection they found something. In fact, they kind of call it line starting by European scholars quality overall rational. Much more market.
Very well spoken. Mas Munir, I think the question is also interesting. You thought whether modernity
good or bad for studies of Islam? Well, I was trained as a sheikh in Al-Azhar. So, yeah, as a religious scholar, so yes, I learned Orientalism in Al-Azhar, but to show the extent that Orientalism was in line with Islam or not. So, Orientalist studies of Islam are in line with our theology, Islamic theology, so we accept it. We can say this is a fair Orientalist. But on the contrary, if their findings are contrary to our theology, so it's bad Orientalist. So, within an institution which theology what directs our understanding of Islam, so we have no choice but read Islam through certain theology. But modernity introduced us with a new values of freedom of individual freedom and also democratization of authority, which enable us to move to another side and introduce us to that there is another way of reading Islam from non-theological perspective. That is what we learn in Europe. So when we come back to Indonesia, we sometimes are asked why did you learn Islam in Europe? It's good that you just remain in Egypt. So yeah, I think that's good side from the question.
Interesting. Mas Tuhan, please.
I'm a member of Untitled Chapter. But I think that the first question is one of your defenses, and there are some one thing that I like. So we see that has very type or oriented. So I am whether that is or no or second I say I Sabina
Sabina, the Crystal Seminar.
yeah that presentation for first I understand something on the that the exit for important for us but
Thank you very much. Very interesting and touching and point of the research. I start from the first one. The question of the interlinear translations is rather difficult because we have to consider that somehow in countries the question balance in translations as a way to acquire the and the significance of the Arabic text. But Arabic text and mainly in other languages coming from right to left. In Europe, it has always been a problem because to produce an interlinear translation maybe word by word problematic because not the order of the word from left to right. And so this is also a practical reason why we don't have so many interlinear translations. The one you have, like the one by Rector, but also I know, not mentioning the name, the case of Ikhwan that started to translate Quran, writing Latin or European language translation between the lines of Quran. They used to put one word after the other, but it was problematic because it made no sense because the order of the word is right. So it was not much more. Secondly, also you have to consider that Europeans of the 18th century had not so many men. So you have secondors who were producing their handwritten stuff, but having a small amount of Quran manuscripts, they were not used to write. It was absolutely uncommon. They used preferably, and then I come to the second question, to put sign and maybe to write on margin of commentaries. It's quite surprising to a certain point that all the scholars working on it with made one copy of the Quran, copies of the Quran and a copy of the commentaries, left their handwriting preferably on the commentaries. And there can be many answers. Maybe they had problems fully comprehending. Probably easier to isolate by reading the Quran